Chris O'Neill from Sew the Distance. Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Lessons from an Old Quilt. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing to my channel and hitting that bell that tells you when I upload a new video. So let's get started on this week's quilt. I purchased this quilt just last week at a thrift shop here in Pennsylvania, and I fell in love with it. I have a few other quilts that are in my collection currently that I do want to highlight, but I found this one and it just shouted spring to me. This beautiful baby quilt is appliqué and hand quilted, and it's just darling. So let's take a closer look at this wonderful quilt. There are 30 blocks in all, with 15 of them being solid blocks and 15 being appliqué blocks. And these sweet little animals are appliqué by hand on the alternating blocks. There are 13 different animals featured with 2 duplicates, but even the duplicates are different configurations of the animals. For example, we have this sweet elephant here. It has his trunk up. But down here we have what looks like maybe a baby elephant with his trunk going this way. So you can see that even when there were duplicates, they are different, which I love that attention to detail from the maker. Each of these sweet animals are also embroidered, which we've seen before, but what's different about this particular one is that it brings the animals to life. So if we look at, say, this sweet elephant, you can see how he would have just been kind of a blob and you wouldn't have seen the detail as much, but the maker went in and added the ears, the sweet little tail, and all of the other things that would make him an elephant, and we would see that. Another thing that the maker did that I love is the eyes and the little tongue added to each one. With this muted colors with the yellows and the green and the off-white, just adding that pop of color and detail brings these little guys to life. I love that. They're so sweet because they're so fun to look at and they're just adorable. So let's talk for a minute about the quilting, which is amazing too. It is all hand quilted. What the maker did was put this medallion in the middle here and then added these flowers on the corners, which I love because it shows like a half a flower in each of the blocks, giving you that secondary pattern as well. I love that too. Each animal is also quilted around, making it pop out a little bit more, and we see that on the back of this quilt really well. Also, each block is quilted around, and you can see that, and it just adds to the whole thing. There was a lot of detail, and it was all hand quilted, and it was all hand pieced as well, so it was completely done by hand. Lastly, in the borders, we see a wonderful motif too, and it's this rope motif, and then in the center is this darling little heart. And everything's done in this taupe thread as far as the quilting goes, which I think also adds to the whole overall look of this quilt, because if it were done in matching thread, you'd still see the quilting, but I don't think it would stand out as much. So let's look at the back of this quilt. The back is made up of a solid yellow piece of fabric, and you can really see the quilting on this. And I love that too, because you can even see what the animals look like because of the quilting that was on the back, and that just adds to this. It's such a super soft quilt. There are a few stains and marks. I did wash and dry this quilt. However, it was crinkly like this before I did that, and I did get a lot of the staining off, but there are a few that remained. I can overlook that because this quilt is so darling. Okay, let's talk about this wonderful binding. So this binding is teeny tiny. It's probably a 1/4 inch, and it is separate from the backing, even though it matches it. It was added separately, and it even has these wonderful curved corners. So the maker absolutely used, I believe, bias binding to make them, which is probably also why it held up so well. This is tiny though, and when I look at this, I'm thinking, I don't know, that's kind of scary to work with something that small, but I love the overall look of it because it just adds that little bit of color that you need in the edge of this quilt. So I think it was really, really well done. So there's a few things I want to highlight that the maker did that I think is something that we can learn about how this quilt was made and what we can put into our own practices. The first thing is that sweet, teeny binding. I don't know how the maker did it, and it's flawless. I always get nervous when I go very small because I'm afraid it's going to look wonky. but it makes this quilt, and I absolutely love the curved corners. It just adds a softness that's adorable. The next thing that we can learn from this maker has to do with the quilting and putting those sweet motifs of a heart along with that rope into this quilt. There's so many details in this quilt, and I think that sometimes it's almost like, you know, when you wear makeup, if you wear makeup, and you put mascara on, it just kind of brightens up your whole face, and it's just that little tiny thing that does it. I feel like that's what has happened with this quilt and this maker. This maker knew that those little details are going to be what makes this quilt, and that's a great example of it, those tiny hearts that I noticed in the borders. I love that. The next thing that I think is so important about this quilt are those sweet eyes and the tongue on each of the animals. It brings them to life, and it adds this whimsical feel to it. It's so sweet to look at. You just want to look at each animal and see how the details were made. I love that too. We could also talk about how thin the batting is, which is wonderful too. And of course, those quilting motifs that give you a secondary pattern, the elongated squares. There's so much we could talk about and we could learn from this maker. Thank you so much for watching as we explored this lovely quilt. It's going to be a permanent part of my collection. There are a few that I'm going to be selling, but this one is staying, at least for a while, I think. I just love it. I love looking at it. I also bought a companion quilt at the exact same time that I think was made by the same person. So in a few weeks, we'll look at this baby quilt as well, and it's also very sweet. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time for Lessons from an Old Quilt, and I'll see you later this week for my vlog. And of course, on Mondays, I have my Organized Quilting Room Challenge that's going on until September. So I'll see you soon. Have a great week, and make sure you take some time to quilt.